Jesus tells a parable indicating that the blessings of God's kingdom are available to all, but the invitation is not to be taken lightly. A reading from Matthew chapter 22. Once more, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a great wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. Again, he sent other slaves, saying, 'Tell those who have been invited, look, I prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they made light of it and went away, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his slaves, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. And then he said to his slaves, 'The wedding is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet.' Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all whom they had found, both good and bad, so the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?' And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.'" The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. Sisters and brothers in faith, grace to you and peace from God our Father and from our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Something strange happens at the royal wedding. Oh, but before that, don't you just hate it when Jesus ruins his parables? He was telling such a great parable, and then he does that thing with the wedding robe, and it just bothers me. He had a good thing going. Come on, Jesus, you can do better. Anyway, something strange happens at this royal wedding. The king invites all the nobles and all the VIPs, all the people who are supposed to be invited to a wedding. And because this is the wedding of the prince and the princess. It's like Prince Andrew and Kate Middleton. You got to invite everybody to this thing. And the nobles and the VIPs laughed at it. They ignored the invitation. Some of them even beat up the messengers. Is that strange behavior? Do you do that when you get a wedding invitation? So what's going on here? When you think about it, there is nothing in a country that is more important than the prince's wedding, right? That's something you clear your calendar for, because this is the king's son, right? You do not miss this thing. And they had plenty of advance notice. It wasn't like a surprise. And so the only reason to do that would mean there's something brewing under the surface. There's some kind of rebellion going on. Or maybe people are just against this king. Or maybe it's just plain treason. That's kind of the message that they're sending here. And so, of course, the king sends his troops and he puts down the rebellion that's happening. That's what you do when you're king. You don't let those things keep going. It's a different story. You read the same story in Luke chapter 14. In that version, the one who's throwing the wedding feast is not a king. He's just kind of a rich person that lives in the community. And people, they don't come. They make excuses. They're busy with their business or their farm. And the message of that story is more that people mustn't let that which is good crowd out that which is the best. Does that make sense? That's kind of the message of that one. But in Matthew, it's much more political. There's kind of almost an open rebellion going on here. And the actions of these folks who refuse say, we want a different king. We serve a different ruler. We want to be citizens of a different government. And so after the king puts down the rebellion, he goes out into the streets and into the neighborhoods, and he invites everybody he finds to the son's wedding. And can you hear how great that was? What an opportunity. These are people. The people who live out there are not the nobles, they're not the VIPs, they're not the wealthy. They've never seen such splendor as they're going to experience at this wedding. and now they get to share in it. And nobody would turn this down. Of course you wouldn't turn it down. It's like being invited to London for the wedding of Prince Andrew and Kate Middleton, right? How many of you were invited? I wasn't either. How many of you would go if you were invited? Yeah, of course you'd go. And if you don't go, I mean, you're crazy. You got to go. This is who gets to do stuff like this? And the weddings in those days, they weren't just like an afternoon like we do. The weddings in those days, they were a week long. They were a big celebration. And so everybody gets on their fancy clothes, and the king gives them these clothes. The soldiers get all their uniforms. The horses even get dressed up in whatever horses wear when they dress up. And the guests are all given special wedding robes to wear for this wedding, because it's got to be perfect. This is the prince getting married. And these people, they're used to eating, their diet is maybe flatbread and a few vegetables every day. And now for a whole week, they're going to feast on fatted calf, roast lamb, the finest fruits, figs and dates and grapes and oranges, rich desserts filled with whipping cream and all that. Are you getting hungry? It's just like the best. And champagne. Who gets champagne? I mean, they're going to serve champagne. You see all this coming before you, and of course you're going to go. Nobody in their right mind wouldn't go. What an opportunity to live like a king for a week. Except one guy. There's always one, right? Not wearing the robe that the king gave him. Why would anybody do that? It's kind of like you go to a wedding and all the bridesmaids are up there and they're all wearing the dress that the bride picked out, except one. I mean, how would that go over? Would that be good? Or the choir. The choir's up here. They're all singing. They're all dressed in their robes, except one. Or a football team. They're all wearing their purple, except one guy in green. I mean, this is just huge disrespect for the king. Humiliating to the prince. And of course the king has to kick this guy out. Wouldn't you? And the party goes on. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like that. It's like a king's party. It's one that you could never, ever hope to be invited to. And yet you are. Isaiah described that party like this. He said, on this mountain in Jerusalem, the Lord will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wines, of rich foods filled with marrow, of well-aged wines strained clear. And he will destroy on this mountain the shroud that is cast over all peoples, a sheet that is spread over all nations. God will swallow up death forever. And then the Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. And the disgrace of his people he will take away from all the earth. For the Lord has spoken. And it's going to be said on that day, lo, this is our God. We've waited for him that he might save us. This is the Lord for whom we have waited. Let us be glad and rejoice in his salvation. I always love this language. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation. It sounds so biblical, right? I mean, basically they're saying, let's party. This is good news, right? It's time to have a good time together. This is the best news ever. What would you do to get invited to a party like that, where death is no more? Who wouldn't give anything they have to be a part of that celebration? After all the tearful goodbyes, after all the separation and pain, to have every tear wiped away and death swallowed up forever in a reunion party that has no end. Who would not give everything for that? And the trouble is, you and I can't get into this party any more than we can get invited to the royal wedding. All the money in the world won't do it. all the political connections in the world won't get you in. We can't get in because we are citizens of a different country where death reigns supreme. We can't get in unless this king really is king over death. And unless this king has invited you. And the good news is you are invited for free. The invitation has been delivered by hand to you. It happened on the day of your baptism, right? The Lord made the mark of the cross on your forehead like a tattoo. Can't get rid of it. And you've got a calligraphied card at the table with your name on it, a place where you will sit at this great feast. And you have a wedding outfit. Did you know that? You have a wedding outfit. It was also given to your baptism. Luther called it the happy exchange. You've heard of this stuff before. Jesus gets your old dirty rags, full of sin and death and all that kind of stuff. And you get his robe of life and righteousness. Perfect. You are literally clothed with Christ, the nicest clothes of all. Why would anybody ever give up a place at the table with the king? But the truth is, sometimes we do, don't we? Sometimes I'm just proud enough to rebel against the Lord, to say I want to do it my way, all those sorts of things, to pledge allegiance to something other than God. But the even better news is, while we were yet enemies of God, Christ died for us. While we were yet enemies of God, Christ died for us. The invitation remains. And we rebels who come here each week, we hear and taste our rebellion. You know how it goes. This is my body given for you. I mean, what does that mean other than we literally kill him with our busyness and with our unbelief and with our rebellion? This is my blood shed for you. We try to get rid of him and he keeps on coming back with the same word. Shalom. The name of the church, Shalom. Peace be with you. And finally, maybe, we hear and we taste just how lucky we are. Forgiveness for our rebellion. Invitation to the King's death of death party, the party to end all parties, And then an invitation to go out and to invite others to this party too. What a privilege to be there. What a privilege to be a part of it. Amen.